PhD, learning where all those ropes go. And it was great, but at the end, when I was doing the painting, I managed to paint smoke right across all that stuff, so I didn't have to paint all that rigging. There was a lot more I had to learn. I could tell you a lot about that ship that, it's just didn't get into the painting at all. That started my relationship with National Geographic. I did one other painting for them for another article, and then they called and said, hey, we are doing a story on David Thompson, a guy who mapped Canada back in the 1700s. And he actually traveled 80,000 miles in his life. He came from London as a 26-year-old guy. He was about my size. And I used me to model for him because it's easier to pose yourself than to go hire models. But I was similar to this guy. His leg, as soon as he got here to the United States, he was trying to get up to Canada, working with the Hudson Bay Company, and he sat in a cot for 6 months while his leg was healing, and he always walked with a limp after that throughout his life. But this guy was amazing. He had a sextant and other supplies when he was traveling in canoes, and he kept taking readings all the time during this expedition that he went on constantly all throughout Canada. They found that his readings were so accurate that even by satellite now, they were never more than maybe 3 meters off. And that was in the 1700s. That's dedication for you. So a writer wanted to write about this guy, and they wanted an illustrator to illustrate some of the moments in his life that were important. So they asked if I would go on a canoe trip down this one particular river that he had a major problem with. In the 1700s, almost died, and I said, sure, why not? So I didn't believe that was going to happen, but I found myself going on expedition with National Geographic, which is nerve-wracking in itself, because I thought, oh, I've never done this before, but I will act like the ninja about this. And so basically what I thought I'd do today is show you what happened on that trip. Just moments along the way. I was given a couple cameras from National Geographic to carry with me. They wanted me to record things and then sketch along the way. We were going down, we were avoiding class 5 and 6 rapids while we were in a canoe. I'm paddling away. There's no time to draw. I picked up the camera every now and then and took some shots. That was about it. But we portaged around a lot of stuff. I'll talk about that. But basically, if any of you go on an expedition with National Geographic and you ask them for camera equipment, they say, yeah, what do you want? Because they have it all. And so I went to National Geographic, to their camera department, and I picked out some of the most expensive stuff I could think of, and carried these 2 cameras with me in a pouch along the way. One of them came apart along the 8-hour van ride as we went up to Saskatchewan, Canada. This river is way up north towards the Northwest Territories, called the Fond du Lac River. Makes a big S-curve. And we were driving up along the way to get to the float plane. We were going up and down hills, and I was cleaning the camera to make sure everything was working right. And the entire section, there's an advance arm. This is back when we had film. The entire advance arm came apart and floated in front of me as we went up weightless over a hill. All the parts separated in the air. And I looked at it and thought, well, that can't be right. And so I just put my hand over the top, and we came down, and I slammed them all back in the camera, and it still worked. It was the strangest thing ever. I decided to tell that because it's really weird. But anyway, so this is the float plane. When we were attaching the canoes to the bottom of the plane to fly in, we went about an hour farther north from where we had the float plane. I went from jet planes to prop planes, and then the truck, and now the float plane. The first time I'd been on a float plane, there were two planes going in. There were 6 of us, and we had 3 canoes. And here's where we put in at Potato Lake. That just came back. I was trying to remember that for weeks. We put in, and they dumped our canoes off, and we put all of our equipment in there. And at that point, we were completely cut off from civilization. We didn't have GPS, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have radios, we didn't have anything. Unfortunately, the guys packed decaf coffee. So everybody that was a coffee drinker on a trip had massive headaches by about 2 days in. We managed to find a cabin up there, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and we looked in the window and found that they had coffee in there. So we broke into the cabin, fixed the pot of coffee immediately while we were writing the I am sorry note that National Geographic would send them a pound of coffee at some point. Like I said, we were up there with nobody. First people we saw on the river as we started out that day were from Alabama on a fishing trip. I thought, well, this is not nowhere. But basically, here we are with all of our gear that we kept in barrels to keep them dry, not like David Thompson. David Thompson didn't even wear his pants in the canoe. They were all in leather, and they kept all their equipment loose in the canoe. They paddled without their pants because they were constantly getting wet. They also kneeled in the canoe, and their paddles were only about that wide and about this long. Then with the handle on it, and they paddled very quickly, like this. We were paddling slowly, and I'm not sure why they paddled like that, but that's how they did it in the 1700s. This was basically the guy that knew the river. He's checking his maps and stuff, and I got to ride with him. He was the #1 canoeist in Canada that year, and had been for several years. This guy could drive a canoe. I barely had to work at it. I was the navigator in the bow, but he was the guy driving this thing. I almost took a few times to draw along the way because he was totally in control. But this was our young 21-year-old Native American guide, Leon. Leon was in my 10th, and we did not get along at first, which is a bit challenging. And we found a way to get along a few days later, and it was great. We got very close along the way. It was excellent. I gave him an eagle feather, which he put in his hat. I found it because we were crawling up this tree into the eagle's nest, and no, I found it at the bottom of the eagle's nest. They're everywhere if you look at the bottom of an eagle's nest. But he really enjoyed that. He was a great canoeist as well. Here we are just stopping off. This is a little bit of the environment we were in. It was overcast a lot, rained a ton. We were up there for 2 weeks. And had anything happened along the way, there was no way to get a message out. We would have to go down the river. Every now and then a float plane went by that, carrying firefighters, because there were fires that were burning at the time up there. As a matter of fact, the fire started up about the distance of where that island is in that shot. One night when we were just setting up camp, and a fire started in the forest and burned itself out by morning. We thought maybe the float planes would come in, but they didn't. The person standing in the bow of the canoe there, which is not a good technique when you're in a canoe, but that's Maria Stenzel, and she was a National Geographic photographer. And she took so many rolls of film, 120 rolls of film, just unheard of at the time. I took 20 rolls of film. This is us just on the river at a wide spot. And I thought I'd just show a few of the conditions we were under when it did get nice. This was in August. And like I say, 2 weeks up there, and about the middle of August. Temperatures were in the 70s during the day. At night it dropped into the 40s and 30s sometimes. Some days you could wake up in the morning and see wolf prints around the campsite, which was a little daunting. We did see a couple black bear up there, and my canoe mate, Leon, took us right over to go see them. He wanted to paddle right up close to them. Luckily, they ran away. I was the only guy that saw a moose in the canoe, because I was in the bow in the first canoe. Around the corner, there was a moose standing in the river, and I said, "Oh my God, moose!" which scared it off into the woods, and nobody else saw it, so they never believed me. This is a little bit more what the landscape's like up there. The scrub pines and rough bluffs along the river. Sometimes very shallow. That last shot was maybe a foot deep. And other times you couldn't see the bottom. The amazing thing up there is the water. It was all crystal clear. You could see straight to the bottom everywhere, and you could drink right straight from the water. Just dip your cup in and drink. And it was the best water I'd ever had in my life. It was amazing. Leon liked to fish, so he was catching pike every now and then. And the guys were getting better at that. I never did any fishing because I was drawing half the time. And they got better and got bigger fish after a while. We were inundated by mosquitoes and black flies most of the time. I came home with 300 to 400 black fly and mosquito bites. That was no fun. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced black flies. Yeah, you can't feel them. And they have something in their saliva that deadens the wound as they're chewing on your ear. It's bizarre. Anyway, this is a couple of walleye. This is the best fish I ever had in my life, and I had to take a picture of it. So this is what it looks like if you ever see this great walleye. Leon made that along the way. The whole place up there is covered in moss, and it's covered in wonderful colors. But have you guys ever seen blue moss? I've never seen, have you? Lichen. Lichen, yeah. Well, it's about this deep. You can sleep on it, and it covers everything. But this was amazing, amazing stuff. Just beautiful things up there. 5 and 6 class rapids. We did not get to go down that, thankfully. We had to portage around places like this. And here it is a little bit more up close. So we weren't too excited about taking any risks. And David Thompson would also portage around these falls as well. Here we are, having just gotten around it and get ready to put in again. This is the spot where David Thompson actually had his worst accident. He was trying to, what they call line the canoes along some of these falls. So he had 2 Native Americans with him who would run a rope out to the bow of the canoe and guide it down the river while he was in the canoe himself. They got to a point next to some trees, and they argued about whether to go one side of the tree or the other, which to me is not really a necessary argument to have while David Thompson was out in the falls and the canoe was getting ready to tip. And he managed to, this is a little bit closer shot of the area where he is likely to have gone over the falls. He was trying to right the canoe. This is the example of the illustration I did when I got back home of that moment. There's the 2 natives on the side and Thompson in the bow of the canoe with the rear of the canoe coming around ahead, and he's paddling frantically to bring the bow around. And just as he brought the bow around, he made it over the falls and then tumbled anyway. So all the equipment went down river, and they spent the next couple of days retrieving all their stuff. Luckily, he retrieved the sextant so he could keep taking readings. This is basically what the entire article looked like. I'll have some more of these later. This was the most critical spot on the river. This is a rapids that goes in between some rocks on the top right, makes a sharp left-hand turn, and then makes another sharp right-hand turn. This thing was a killer angle on the river, and there's no way we could get through that. So we took the canoes out at the top, and I took some shots. And the National Geographic photographer put on a wetsuit and with a line attached, and she went down into that roiling water to take underwater shots. She just was curious, and while we're all holding on to her with a rope. She was quite the photographer. Here we are trying to figure out how she's going to get in the water. And that's how massive that thing was at the time. Here it is at 4:30 in the morning when she woke me up and said, "Ooh, the light is really nice on the waterfall." So I got up and took shots as well. And this is basically how it came out in the magazine. She was there at the, we were both there on the edge taking the same shot. So I felt like I took that for the magazine, but not quite. Then morning was a little bit later on. We were preparing and trying to figure out our way out of this thing. And we were just going to have to put in and paddle like crazy to get through some of this. Then the sun came out and we could see a pathway through down through this section, and that was a fun ride getting through there, but we did okay. We came through it. And then we discovered toward the end of the trip this island of dogs, and they were the coolest dogs ever that I had seen. The whole island was full of them. Apparently the Native Americans would put their sled dogs out there during the summer and come and feed them and stuff. And then in the winter, when the river would freeze over, then the dogs would come to the camps. But these guys were extremely sweet. That's me with my tiny little feather that Leon gave me. And maybe I wasn't native enough or something like that. I don't know. But I wanted to take this little guy home with me, but he wasn't allowed to go with us. So the morning of the last day, we were taking shots of Leon out in the fog with the sun coming up, and it just felt like a wonderful trip. Nobody got injured. I cut my finger. That was about it. The rest of this trip was magnificent. We were on a place called Black Lake near an Indian village up there, a Native American village up there, that had just had their first student return from college to come back and teach at their high school. And it was quite a special day for them. They were loving that. So here we are with the canoes, and I was running around taking, National Geographic pictures of cobwebs in the dew and stuff, which would never show up in the magazine. But so the morning came on very bright and wonderful. And then by the end of the day, the float planes were back, and it was overcast again. And we were cutting across the lake to meet the plane. And this is what the watercolors look like that I did for the actual article. It's called David Thompson, the Man Who Measured Canada. And this is an event they had during that time where one of the horses went nuts and threatened to kill some of their party. This is David Thompson in the front and his Native American bride at the time. A lot of these voyagers would have Native American wives, and they would abandon them after a time and go back to wherever they came from. A lot of these guys were from England. But David Thompson never left his Native American wife and stayed with her throughout his life. This was an example of capturing beaver skins and stuff for the Hudson Bay Company. Just so you know, I got this wrong. They actually are on circular loops or hoops, to dry out the beaver skins. And we didn't have that information. But boy, did we have that information when the article came out. Got a lot of letters on that. And who did they point to get it wrong? Moi. So those artists, man, they can't get anything right. Here he is taking a reading at night off the moon with his native guides and some of the people on his trip. And when they had to cut across the Athabasca Pass during the winter one time, there was nothing they could do but build their own snowshoes and hoof it on foot. So they had that in the article as well. And let's see, one more. And that is the end of that trip with National Geographic. That's me, a little bit younger. So any questions about anything? That trip or my artwork or whatever?
How did National Geo respond once the loop was...
Oh, they reprint some of the letters in the next issue, and then they write how terrible the artist was, that he got that wrong. No, they apologize and say, oh, you're right, you know, it's a circular thing, it's the one thing we got wrong, give us some credit for getting everything else right. No, they're pretty polite.
I'm surprised they didn't make you redo it.
Oh, it was too late. The magazine was already printed and out, yeah. It was irritating. It was irritating to me because we were working really tight. I mean, with all the researchers and everything, we thought we had all the details right. I mean, everything in those watercolors is correct. All the little equipment and all the what they were wearing and how they kept their hair and all that sort of thing. Pretty fascinating. National Geographic is phenomenally accurate when you work with them. I did a article on the ancient Scythians, who were sort of the bad boys of the steppes, I guess, way back when. And they used to get their butts kicked all the time by hordes of people coming through, and they would stomp on the Scythians all the time until the Scythians said, all right, okay, we're stopping that. We're going to become the worst guys ever to deal with. And they did. They used to wear the skins of their enemies on their horses that they flayed after killing them. And when they went into battle, they would send battle dogs into camps to rip people apart before they came in, and then took skulls and took the tops off the skulls so they could drink out of the skull. And it was, you know, if you read about the Scythians, they were just brutal. But I had a conversation with a couple Russian folks in D.C. about the details of their socks that they wore. And I thought, you know, if they're going this far with socks, what is this job going to be like? Well, it was an incredible experience as well. I got to learn a lot about their burial mounds. They would bury these guys with all their ritual garb and things, and it's pretty fascinating to understand their history and their culture, even though they were pretty mean. But you know, I guess you got to cut them some slack for that. So, yeah. I also did some work with Geographic on the black pharaohs that came up from Nubia and overtook Karnak, and the battle that they had there, and building their own form of pyramids, which were very much smaller and kind of pointy. Very bizarre, interesting work. And sometimes when you work with Geographic, the researchers in the field are still bringing in information while you're working on the sketches. So in that particular sketch of the Black Pharaohs article, I had to change the front gate at, I'm sorry, it wasn't Karnak, it was another one. I have to think of that. There was a gate that had one statue in front of it, about 30 feet high. I've been led to believe it was 100 feet high, We had to change that. Then it became much smaller. Then it became 2 statues. And after I had the painting painted, they found out that it was 4 statues. I had to go back in and paint all 4 statues in the painting again. It's just before press time. So, kind of scary on that. Anyway, you have any other questions?
Before photoshopping?
Much before photoshopping. That would have been great. Could have had that done in no time. Hey.
How does the travel inspire your art?
How does the traveling inspire my art? The thing about that they're finding a lot these days with neuroscience is that travel is actually very good for the brain, because it's about experiencing the things that you don't expect to experience, and forces the brain to deal with it, in a sense, to understand how to take what you already know and shift and change that. That's why languages are particularly good for the brain, because it's constantly trying to compare back and forth, and that comparison is supposed to be pretty great. The students I teach online, I try to get them to understand that A, forget about talent, B, forget about your muse, because if she shows up, she's pretty drunk and pissed off anyway. She's not going to give any help. And basically, it's about the process of learning and making mistakes. So when we travel, we make mistakes all the time, and hopefully it's good mistakes, because a lot of times we're on vacation. But if you're traveling like with Geographic, it's all fact-finding all along the way, and it's problem-solving along the way. So we had some trouble on the canoe trip, but like with the coffee, and everybody's got hangovers, and we had to figure out. So we got lucky on that and found a cabin that had coffee in it. That wasn't too hard to figure out, but the brain loves to work on that stuff. Of course, ours loved the caffeine after that. So but the inspiration comes from the challenge all the time. So a lot of times I'll get a call for work, and the idea with illustration is if they could photograph it, they probably would use that. Because we've gotten away from the day when they wanted to use illustration just because illustration was so cool. The camera records these things, and a lot of people think that if it's shot by a camera, it must be real. Actually, I would argue that the illustrator's approach is possibly a little more real than the camera, because of what they bring to it and what the team brings to the illustration, as opposed to the camera being very isolated and cold and only recording information that we think is the way it looks. Actually, the camera records all the details, but we only see what we're looking at. So when I look back at the person that asked the question, I really only see you. Everything around is slightly blurred out. And if you go to check on it, I can't, because that section becomes clear, and then that section's clear, and everywhere I look is clear. So it feels like what we see on a camera. Does that make sense? Yeah, so the inspiration, again, coming from the travel, is an encouragement of trying to capture reality that's maybe a lot more interesting than just a photograph. So it's not just about the detail. So I was talking to some people yesterday up in the gallery, and they were talking about the brushwork in my paintings. And the thing about the brushwork is it immediately says handwork. It's a kind of calligraphy. It says a hand did that, but I'm describing rocks with those hand strokes. So when you look at it, you see hand strokes, but wait, it's a rock, but it's a hand stroke, but it's a rock. And that's what the brain loves to do. Because it can't latch on to one, it constantly works on blending those simple ideas like that. So you'll see people walk up and look, and then they'll step back to look. You see them in museums all the time, like with Sargent. Like, how does that look like fur? And they walk up and they see the strokes, and then they step back, and it comes together again. And the brain really loves that. So that's pretty much, I hope that answered your question. That's pretty much the inspiration. How much story can I get into one painting?
Did you encounter much wildlife?
Wildlife? Yeah.
People?
Yeah, no people, just the guys that were fishing that first day from Alabama. And they said, "What are you doing here?" And we said, "What are you doing here?" You know, we're out in the wilderness. There's not supposed to be anybody here. But no, we saw a moose. Actually, the thing was, there's a lot of Canadian geese flying south, I guess, in August. So I saw a chevron. You know, they fly in a chevron shape. And one of those went over, and it was gigantic. So I was kind of calculating with my hand the number of birds on one leg. 300 on that leg. So that was a 600 bird chevron going over. And then 2 minutes later, another one. And a couple minutes later, another one. And they did that all afternoon. Thousands upon thousands of Canadian geese were going over. I couldn't stop counting them. It was crazy. So that was pretty fascinating. You know, we heard coyote, we heard wolves. We didn't get to see those guys. They're pretty stealthy. Eagles all over the place. Fish leaping. I mean, it was sort of like going back to the 1600s up there because of so much wildlife around. Moose. We saw a lot of river otters that were following us a lot, things like that. Trying to think of anything else we saw. No, float planes and forest fires after that. But, oh, one other thing. It was about 1:30 at night, and I poked my head out of the tent just to see if I could see any of the wolves walking around the camp, which probably wasn't a good idea, but I noticed the aurora borealis was out. And I stepped outside to look up. I don't know, has anybody seen that? Just one or two people. In Canada, it was crystal clear, and I just started screaming. I got the whole camp up. Everybody, we were all dancing. Look at you can't imagine what it looks like. It's like lasers cutting through smoke. You know, there's a level of the smoke, and it comes down to the atmosphere, and it levels out, and that's what we see. We see that spiraling. Well, we always see those shots, and it looks like it's so calm and just restful, and it just hangs in the air. It doesn't. It shoots back and forth, really wild and crazy, and it's just the most amazing light show you've ever seen. And the guys back in the 17 and 1800s used to think that it made noise. So they perpetuated, I think, a myth that the aurora borealis has a soundtrack, basically. But I don't think it does, and my research says that that's not true. But they felt that they could hear it. So, of course, the stars up there are amazing. You can see the Milky Way. It's incredible. Very crystal clear. So that's also inspiration for my work. When you experience things like that through travel, that stays with you a lot. Anybody else? Yeah.
I believe you mentioned you went to art school.
Yeah.
Where did you go?
Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I'm proud to say they were lousy in 1973. Actually, they have embraced illustration at this point. They don't know my work, and they can't find me. They didn't do a Google search, I guess, but no. In '73, the big thing in the art schools was conceptual art, and they thought that was where it was all heading, and why should we paint and draw anymore? And they just didn't know they were going to run into guys like me who were like, yeah, but no, I want to learn how to draw and paint. Well, it's going out of style. Yeah, I don't care. I'm out of style. I don't know. So, yeah.
What inspired you to get into the 1930s type genre with the polar bears?
Oh, upstairs,
Yeah.
that show?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I always loved biplanes. I love flying things. I grew up about 45 minutes south of Dayton, Ohio, birthplace of aviation, and they had the Air Force Museum up there that still is phenomenal. And they had all different kinds of flying machines, and I was captivated by that. And that, to me, right away, was adventure. And when it came to, I actually did a video of how I paint with a company back in 2009, and I was talking to my friend Irene Gallo, who's an art director at Tor Books. I said, in 24 hours the film crew is going to show up and I have no idea what I'm going to paint. And she said, well, you like to paint snow. Why don't you do a guy riding a polar bear? And I thought, that was dumb. And then I thought, wait, she's got a point. Maybe not riding the polar bear. Maybe polar bear pack animals. So that came directly from this trip. I couldn't get canoes in it, but I thought, oh, okay, so pack animals. I did that one painting, and the entire show and the book came from that painting, which is upstairs right now. People wanted to know, what the heck is up with that guy and the polar bears? So I had to sit down and write it. And when I did, all the adventure stuff, all the travel, all the fun stuff as a kid just came out because no one said I couldn't do that. Minneapolis College of Art and Design was not telling me I couldn't do that anymore. So all that came out. And I managed to indulge my love of the early 1900s, say about World War I stuff. Mostly because, too, I was restricting the characters to not have as much equipment like we have today. Didn't want to make it easy, and it wasn't easy back then. And any equipment they did have was cumbersome and large, and it was steam-powered, sorta, maybe not. I threw that in. That's about the level of technology. Anyway, at that point, the visuals got to be really fun, so I could go anywhere I wanted with it.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I like that, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, yeah. Has everyone seen the show upstairs yet? I encourage you to go see it because I think you'll get a charge out of it. And what the heck, if you don't love polar bears, I mean. And no, they don't talk, they don't wear armor, and they are still wild polar bears. Any other questions? I think that's it. Thank you so much.
You can keep it on, but just turn. Test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Hello. Test. This one should be fine to cube. We gotta do the cube.
Yep.
We're gonna my one thing that causes most problems. Right there.
We're still on.
What?
We're still
And so everybody's so live. We're live because we had a problem with the stream. You can just go like there and just put it right there, and then we're gonna have you just.
deep in thought, so I didn't interrupt you. She was deep in thought. She was deep in thought, so I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, I'm sorry.
No?
Are you going to walk around a lot?
Yep. I'll try and confine it to this area.
That would be great.
I'm going to be drawing as well, so
Are you playing hang now with the audience?
yeah, that's my thing. Don't do that, Rich. What? You just need some more sound, or what?
They sent me out.
So you're gonna be walking?
Just probably within the screen area there. I won't go past the easels.
Okay.
Is that, or do you? I mean, I can try.
We'll be fine. If you replace that, we'll be fine.
So I'm going to replace Greg, and then we need to replace him. So we need 2 more.
Is it better if I stand in a smaller location? What's
I would
best for
prefer
you
you
guys?
not to stand in front of the TV unless you need to be doing a lot of pointing.
Nope, don't need to.
So if we can move it, we can move one of these.
Perfect.
Stay in that general area, that'd be great.
You just tell me. Yeah. All right. You just tell me where you want me to stand, and I'll stand there with. I'll move as little as I possibly can.
This area
Sorry,
right here
this
is all
space
yours,
right-
man.
all right.
Okay?
This is my dance space. That's your dance space. Might be just a few of us here. A very small audience. I may be sitting down with you guys and talking. So great. All right. Just waiting for this.
We're gonna get started.
All right. Just waiting for the cameraman. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome again to the Norman Rockwell Museum. My name is Tom Daly. I'm the education curator for the museum, and we put together a talk that's looking at Norman Rockwell's images of adventure. So we're going to do literal adventure and then maybe some theoretical adventure. So it should be a fun talk. It's something we've done a couple times this week, so it should be pretty good at by this point. And I'll definitely encourage you, if you have questions, to raise your hand. Happy to answer any questions that you have. And we're going to get started right now. Actually, the image that's on the screen at the moment is actually Rockwell's Clipper Club certificate. And you received that from Pan Am World Airways if you flew around the world, which Rockwell certainly did in 1955. Doing illustrations for that airline and making sure that people had a sense of how small the world had become. So we'll be looking at those images in just a couple of minutes, but just to offer a little bit of context, Rockwell started his career with the Saturday Evening Post. If we're looking at Post magazines in 1916. So on the streets of America at that point, you probably would have seen maybe some sleds and some carriages. You would have definitely seen a train or two, not that many automobiles, probably no ships. There weren't a lot of ships on roads at that time, but they certainly were using ships at sea, as Rockwell was familiar with. And then as Rockwell's career would progress on, he would end up illustrating images for the space program. So Rockwell really had the opportunity to take a look at the entire 20th century and show us our part of that century. And we'll start at the beginning here. So I like to start anyway. We see Norman Rockwell's mom and dad. Mom has a kitten in her lap there. Mr. Rockwell is the one with the white tie. His brother Jarvis, who's kind of the superstar of the family, is the one with the darker bow tie standing up. And I say that because Norman Rockwell's brother, Jarvis, was the one that invented a toy that probably all of you played with at some point. And that's a round disc that has a dowel in it with colored circles that graduate up to the smallest size on the top. Most people now have seen it in plastic, but he imagined that toy in wood and made that toy for the American Toy Company for his entire life. That was one of his big contributions. His little brother was kind of jealous of that, because that brought him some acclaim. So there's Jarvis Rockwell up in the back, Norman Rockwell. Right there we see Norman Rockwell's dad. He worked at a textile mill in the New York City area and was a middle manager. Nancy, his mother, with the cat right there, she stayed at home to take care of the two sons. Now, Rockwell's career with the Saturday Evening Post started in 1916, as you've probably heard 3 or 4 times if you've been here, and that was with the Saturday Evening Post right here. You can see that first cover, that boy pushing the baby carriage. Many of Rockwell's images had almost autobiographical beginnings to them. This one, we can imagine Norman Rockwell as a little boy moving to Mamaroneck, New York, spending some time meeting some of the kids in his neighborhood and trying to make some friends. And one way you might be able to do that is to play baseball with the kids that are in your neighborhood. Mr. Rockwell wasn't a perfect athletic specimen. Far from it. He actually wore eyeglasses and he was a little knock-kneed, and he was thin for his entire life. So he oftentimes found himself left out from these baseball games when they would choose sides. So he realized that if he brought his sketchbook with him, he could draw pictures of the boys as they played baseball, and then at the end of the game, he would hand those pictures out to the kids that he'd been playing, And Rockwell would go on to say in his autobiography that pretty soon the kids didn't want to play baseball unless Rockwell was there drawing their pictures. Right? So Norman Rockwell, as a young person and as an adult, was kind of shy. Actually, he's very shy. So imagine the opportunity you would have at 22 years old to be able to have 1 million or 2 million people looking at your artwork on the cover of a magazine. You finally found a way to communicate with people in a very unfettered way. Norman Rockwell also painted images that showed kids just having fun, going swimming in that case. You can see that those boys probably weren't supposed to be swimming, but they definitely had a good time of it. So much fun that their dog is so excited about running, he has all 4 of his feet off the ground at one moment there. So Rockwell often giving us those details to help us see that the adventures, even if they're small, can be very memorable. Another adventure that the Rockwell family would take, they would take summer vacations, and they would travel all the way upstate New York. They might go as far north as White Plains. So they really didn't go very far. And that would have been very typical for a family at that point. Just get out of New York City, even if it's 35 or 40 minutes outside of the city, just to have a little respite from the heat of an urban area. And here they are. They've captured 2 little critters in their hands. I'm not sure if you can see them from where you're sitting, but those 2 little critters are frogs. So the Rockwell boys now each have a pet. And I can't help but think that Rockwell might have thought about that when he created this image right here with that little frog peeking out of the cardboard box. That image created in about 1930 for a Saturday Evening Post cover. And as you can see, it clearly says vacation on that poster, and you see a big steamship there that they might have traveled on. Then we realize it's 1930, and it's the Great Depression, and folks aren't traveling like that. They're traveling like the family that's in front of the poster, maybe going for a one-day trip, single piece of luggage with them. You might notice at her foot right there, you can see that black box. That's actually a Brownie camera. And the neat thing about Brownie cameras is you could take maybe 75 or 100 photographs with some of them. You'd send the camera and the film back to Rochester, New York, to the Eastman Kodak Company, and that company would develop and print your pictures and load the camera again with film and send all of that back to you. So if you're wondering why there's a certain generation that likes to take 2 pictures of everything, that's why, because you couldn't check on your phone if that picture came out right. If eyes were closed, a head was cut off, or you didn't get the right focus. So oftentimes you'll see folks taking second pictures of things that might surprise you they would take 1 picture of. So that's the Brownie camera. As we go to the top of the picture, you might notice the lady's wearing a brand new red cloche hat. Those would have been the height of fashion in the early 1920s. All of the it crowd would have had those hats, but they didn't really filter down to middle America, if you will, until about the early 30s. So she gets a brand new hat, and Dad gets to wear her old hat. Notice that straw hat, if it was a man's hat, it would have had a flat brim. This one has a curved brim, which tells you it's a lady's hat. She also has some flowers that they must have picked for her, and she's holding on to a balloon that's very deflated. I think that Rockwell probably did that to give you the sense of time passing on their vacation. And even though Rockwell would have definitely experienced this with his mother and father, it wasn't always the way with his own children. And we'll talk about that in a couple of moments. We see the brothers Rockwell over there again, Norman Rockwell without the dark tie, his brother Jarvis with the dark tie, and you can see there's just a couple of guys about town. This is probably in New Rochelle, New York, where Rockwell lived for a portion of his life. The illustration on this side is from about the same time, 1919. It's two sailors talking about the girl back home. As you can see the photograph in their hands. Rockwell was in the U.S. Navy Reserve for 103 days. In 1919. So he joined, the war ended very abruptly, and he was out of the Navy. So jokingly, we like to say that maybe Rockwell was the one that helped us win World War I. Probably not true, but we like to say it. Now you wonder, who's that person in that photograph in that sailor's hand? That's Norman Rockwell's first wife, Irene O'Connor. They married 3 years previously. They stayed married for about 13 years, divorcing in 1929. Rockwell here also is sharing the Saturday Evening Post cover with a lady named Edith Wharton. Edith Wharton, who wrote Ethan Frome and pretty much everything else from the early part of the 19-teens, is publishing in this magazine for one reason and one reason alone, and that's a $700 check. That's why she's publishing, the only time she published in the Post. And it was a little gotcha to her manager who had, to her editor, who had wanted to re-edit her pieces that she was sending back from World War I. And she said she didn't want that to happen, but she needed the pieces published, so she went to the Post. They published them, they chopped the pieces up, she barely could recognize the story, but most importantly, the check cleared. So that was her focus at that point. You'll also notice as you go through all of the 323 covers here, there are people like P.G. Wodehouse, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and Mussolini all writing for this magazine. So quite an interesting grouping of people who are contributing to the Saturday Evening Post. As we continue on with the Post, we see maybe one of the most direct references to adventure for Rockwell. Here we have that ordinary clerk who's dreaming about how exciting it would be to be in a pirate ship. And then the next week when you get your magazine delivered to your home, we see a pirate wondering what it would be like to have an average, ordinary home in an everyday life. So Mr. Rockwell really giving us sort of both sides of the story. And he would do that with the Post about 3 times during his career. In this instance, we see, again, maybe a small trip, but a memorable one. The young man coming home from college, right, bringing his dirty laundry home with him, right? So the family could take care of his laundry, but we could see how excited the family is that he's home. Norman Rockwell posing as the dad in the background with the maroon tie. Mary Rockwell, his second wife, posing, hugging her eldest son, Jarvis Rockwell. So that would have been Jarvis Rockwell's nephew, or Norman Rockwell's eldest son, as I said. Tom Rockwell right there in the plaid shirt. Over in that corner, you can see a little bit of a guy with a green tie and cat's eye glasses. That's Peter Rockwell, and you've seen his work already. It's on our grounds here. He's a sculptor. He lived in Rome, Italy for a great number of years, and now he's moved to Massachusetts, so he's back in the United States. Tom Rockwell has written a number of children's books. One's called How to Fight with a Girl and Win, and he wrote another book called How to Eat Fried Worms. And about 14 years ago or so, they made that into a movie, which we thought was really fun. Jarvis right there, you'll have a chance to see a little bit of his artwork upstairs. If you go into the gallery where we have the virtual reality demonstration, look behind that television, you'll see that large installation there. It's actually an installation that Jarvis did here while we were open, and he was approaching 83 years old when he did it. And when he talked about that piece of artwork, he said that that was a journey in the afterlife. So a little bit of an adventure for Jarvis Rockwell to create that image. Again, while we were open and people were walking past him, talking to him, it was quite a fun thing to see. So sometimes, as I said at the very outset, sometimes the journeys are not about where you're going, but about where you're thinking about going. And in this case, we see some of the developmental pieces that you might have noticed upstairs. Over here, black and white photographs. Rockwell using about 75 to 100 photographs for this one image. He does a color study, which you can see upstairs as well. And then the finished work we see here is a Saturday Evening Post cover. And what Rockwell has to do is he has to think about all these different things that will add to the story. And so he changes the boy's shirt. He actually had a striped shirt on when he posed. The bag that was down on the floor, you can see he actually had it in front of the stool. Rockwell moves that so you can see that this boy has run away from home. The police officer changes from the study where he's smiling, sort of enjoying the story of the boy running away from home. And the bottom, the finished work, actually shows the police officer looking a little bit more seriously, listening to what the boy has to say. I have to say, I like to imagine that that little boy ran away because he couldn't get chocolate chip pancakes that morning and thought he'd find them somewhere else. The police officer that posed was a Massachusetts State police officer, and he got in trouble for this picture. And not in the way you might think. When the cover came out, we can clearly see that in the police officer's pocket, he has a brown book. The Massachusetts State Police are very proud of their uniforms. They're the oldest state police organization in our country. And they issue their officers black books to go in their back pocket. They need to take notes, what have you. When this came out, Richard Clemens, the police officer, was called to his commanding officer, and then his commanding officer. Finally, the colonel got involved in the story and asked him, why didn't you have your book that was assigned to you in your pocket? And Dick had to say, I did. I had it, and there it was, my black and white book, and showed him the book that he had. And Mr. Rockwell had to admit that he changed it, right? Because now you can see the contrast of the brown against the blue pants. Since this cover came out in 1958, September 20th, the state police in Massachusetts all have brown books. You can test a theory on the Mass Pike if you want. Get going at a nice speed, they'll find you, no problem. And then you can ask them to look at the book, see how that works out for you. The state police are very proud of this image, and as a matter of fact, at the State Police Museum and Learning Center, in the eastern part of the state, they have this image almost everywhere in the museum, which is kind of fun. So that's called a runaway, an image that Norman Rockwell did, as I said, in the late 1950s, and it was giving us that feeling of what people were thinking about, not running away from home necessarily, but exploration, right? We're going to have the space programs going to start to open up. We're seeing the Soviet Union's kind of competing with us a bit to try and see if we can get something in orbit over the planet. So this is more than just this little boy not getting chocolate chip pancakes. This is more about our culture changing and looking for change and encouraging change. So there's Mr. Rockwell right there, another form of transportation, the toboggan, which we don't have quite enough snow right now to be tobogganing, but maybe in a few days, who knows. That's Mr. Rockwell in the studio that we have on these grounds. He referred to that studio as his best studio yet. That was his final studio, and it was right in the middle of town, just behind his home on South Street in Stockbridge. When he passed away, and then when his wife Molly, who I'll talk about quite a bit later on, when she passed away in 1986, we actually moved the studio from its location out to these grounds. So when you come back in the summer and help us celebrate our 50th anniversary, you can visit Norman Rockwell's studio. We'll have it open and ready for you. So sometimes adventure, again, is a little bit more about what's going on, and we see that these 5 kids are probably going to have some adventures as things continue for them. We obviously see their difference in their skin tone, but we also see a lot of similarities there, too. We see that the boys like baseball. If we look really carefully, we'll see that this boy has a catcher's mitt, and those 2 boys have fielder's gloves, right? So they're going to need one another. We see that the 2 little girls, they both have pink ribbons in their hair. They both have pets, right? And then you might notice that one of the pets is a white cat and the other pet is a black dog. And then you might notice, as you're looking at this picture very carefully now, that the cat in this picture is the aggressor, not the dog. So it reminds us that we can very easily be lulled into doing something that maybe not what we're actually seeing. We can kind of deceive ourselves occasionally. We see 2 adults in the painting. There's one in the window in back and another gentleman unloading the truck. Can you see? I'm going to just point to her right up here, point to her or him right up there. Sort of Gladys Kravitz there, right, looking out the window, wondering what's going on next door. Who's moving in? They're not going out there to bring a tray of chocolate chip cookies or a cake or a pie or anything. They're going about their lives as their lives always have been. And so this is Rockwell hoping that this next generation will bring some change forward. This was done in 1967. So 52 years ago, Rockwell's hoping that's the generation that will make some changes as we move forward in our country. So again, adventure on a slightly different scale. Here's a scale you might have been thinking about. Rockwell working for the Peace Corps, and he's in Africa trying to train someone to use a new plow. And this is again in the 1960s. And what the Peace Corps did was offer people an opportunity, offer different countries an opportunity to have a group of people come from the United States to help them out if they had any questions or problems that they saw. Rockwell actually went to Bogota, Colombia, and illustrated the fact that they needed a new water system there, and the Peace Corps helped them do that. So Rockwell traveled, again, all over the world. Here he is in Russia, Soviet Union at that point. And what Rockwell did was he set up shop kind of on the side of the street and would ask people if they would be willing to come and pose, and he would paint usually their portraits. Rockwell also got trouble when he was in the Soviet Union. He actually almost got locked in the Hermitage while he was there looking around and lost track of time. And they were about to close, and they realized he was still in the galleries. So he really enjoyed his time in the Soviet Union for sure. So he also had the opportunity, as I mentioned at the very beginning, to do some work for the space program that showed what the space program was doing. And here we have Grissom and Young getting ready for their experience in space, which of course was a tragic one. So adventures all around Norman Rockwell, even in 1969 when Rockwell would have been advanced in years. He was born in 1894. He was asked by the federal government if he'd be willing to paint a picture of the Glen Canyon Dam. So one of the things the government thought might be a good way to use this project is to encourage people to go to Lake Powell. So you can bring their power boats there, go swimming, just have some family time together. And they asked Norman Rockwell if he'd paint the picture, and he agreed to do that. But he said he had to go out to Page, Arizona to see the dam and have photographs taken of it. So here he is, sitting down, and there's Molly, his third wife, taking the photographs of the dam. Some of you might have seen the original painting upstairs on display toward the back of the museum. It is on loan to us from the Bureau of Land Reclamation. And again, the next photograph over, we can see Molly taking a picture of her husband in front of the dam, a profile shot there. And then we see at the bottom part of the screen, we see the picture that Rockwell turned in. Keep in mind the Bureau of Land Reclamation, which is hard to say, was not very excited about using this to encourage people to get out to Page, Arizona. After all, when Rockwell met that family of Navajo, they explained to him all of the bad things that have happened after this dam was constructed. It was a hydro dam, very, very large structure. It's 710 feet tall. And when you look at it in this picture, it kind of looks like it might be a very big curb. So Rockwell has set it all the way back in the picture and has focused us on the important part of life's story, and that's people. And in this case, people that didn't have voice to be able to use of their own. So again, Norman Rockwell in 1969 turns this picture into the government. There wasn't much they could do about it. They had already made the contract, so they took the painting, and it usually lives in a welcome center in Page, Arizona. And during the Obama administration, we actually asked to borrow the painting, and the government was very willing to loan it to us. So we're very happy to have it on display here to tell another aspect of Norman Rockwell's work. So in 1956, probably the most obvious adventure that Rockwell would catalog would be his trip around the world thanks to Pan Am Airlines. And this would have been the opening image you would have seen in the Saturday Evening Post or the other magazines of their time. On the far side is one of their brochures about Pan Am Airline. They're the most experienced airline in 1956, apparently. They also had the only opportunity to fly from New York to London, and you would do that on that airplane right down there in the bottom corner. They call it the President's Special. And it was one of the only ways you could get from New York to London at that point at a fairly rapid speed. They gave Norman Rockwell an opportunity to fly on that plane to start his tour in England. And as you look at these images, you might be able to pick out some of the places that he went to. This one right here, of course, referring to England. And as we progress through, we see some other items that might key us into different areas. Notice the camels, the women dancing, probably in France. We see a tea ceremony here in the foreground. And then over there we see Rockwell traveling to the Protectorate of Hawaii, because keep in mind, Hawaii won't be a state for 3 more years. So they're trying to encourage people to fly to Hawaii so they can make a little bit more money off of people traveling. It's a business after all, Pan Am. There's Trafalgar Square. Then right down here we see the Trevi Fountain. And we can see Norman Rockwell actually sketching in that picture the Trevi Fountain that he'll paint for this advertising series. You've noticed that blue bag showing up quite often, right? When you would fly with Pan Am in the 1950s, 60s, and into the very beginning of the 70s, they used to give you a little blue bag that had some personal items in it and a place where you could put your sweater if you were too warm. And it served as an advertising piece for them too, because when you left the airplane, you took that with you and you could show people you've been on Pan Am, and that was a good way for them to try and get people to continue to fly. When you look carefully at this image on the top here, that's a pencil sketch that Rockwell had done when he was in Pakistan. We actually have the pencil sketch in our collection, and it's, let's see, it's about as big as 3 rows up of those post covers and maybe 6 post covers across. Very, very big pencil sketch. And we see from that pencil sketch how Rockwell corrected his work. If he made a mistake, he'd cut out that piece of paper, get rid of that little section of paper, paste another piece of paper there, and continue drawing. Right, so if you guys are all impressed at how he used cut and paste, Rockwell was doing that in the 50s. So here we are. So we have the sketch here, a color sketch right there, one of the photographs from the photo shoot over there. And if you notice if you look very carefully at that photograph, you'll see they're actually sitting in airline seats, which Rockwell had borrowed for a series of photographs for this assignment. So this, I'm sorry, the picture on this side isn't very clear, but I had to add it in because I love that picture of Norman Rockwell showing the rickshaw driver how to pose as a rickshaw driver. I just thought that was a great detail. And you can see that over there. And just as Rockwell did when he traveled out to Missouri to do the Tom and Huck series, he was offering to buy clothes off of the rickshaw driver's back so he could have the real thing to paint from when he returned home. Rockwell continued the series with this image, again showing Hawaii up top, showing a little bit more of the Asian continent over there, and then an individual photograph that Rockwell would have had of one of these outriggers moving through the ocean. Because Rockwell is not going to do a sketch out in the middle of the ocean. He's going to put you on the beach. He's going to take the outrigger, prop it up there, and take a series of photographs so we can get each of the models just right. And if you notice the gentleman there with the bag on his knee, that bag is in perfect position, so when you look at the image, that bag jumps out at you. It's an ad for an airline. That's what he's trying to do here, get you to see the airline. I love the fact, though, that their hats aren't even twisted aside or anything after being tossed through this very rough wave. So this was kind of a tricky thing. We see Rockwell getting off of that Pan Am airliner, greeted by some ladies at the airport. Rockwell thought it was wonderful that they would give you a lei of flowers when you got off the airplane. He commented on that a couple of times in his autobiography. Then you can see a photograph Rockwell's taking. We can actually see him right there, his shadow. He's taking a picture of that gentleman. But we notice when we look at the ad, who's under the umbrella? Norman Rockwell. That's himself there under the umbrella with the ladies as they lounge on the beach. Rockwell said that he was one of his favorite models. Rockwell also traveled to other places in Europe, certainly. We can see the Pont Neuf there. We can see in Scotland a mill. And then up top we can see Kensington Gardens. He traveled to see the Grand Tetons and painted them. He also painted this picture. I haven't asked you guys to do too much reading. As an education curator, that's kind of unusual. I'm going to ask you to do a little reading now. I just want you to read that quote that Rockwell said about the Himalayas. So think how smart all of you were to come to the place that Rockwell thought was prettier than the Himalayas, right? So you guys did it right. And so we see Rockwell, a very loose sketch here of the mountains of the Himalayas. Rockwell is a great one for keeping in mind that you shouldn't let the truth get in the way of a good story. That was something that Rockwell often said. And that's the end of our presentation right now. We're just showing you the exterior of our building. We are celebrating our 50th anniversary, as you've probably heard a million times as you stepped inside this building this year. And that's the studio, and I had that photograph included in this presentation because it's just proving to you that we do have times, a couple of days a year, where we don't have snow and it's not cold. Those are some of our magnolia trees. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have. There will be a fascinating presentation in here when we finish up, and Greg Manchus and Pat O'Donnell are going to do some drawing, some live drawing demonstrations. Also, if you've liked the experience you've had today, you can stop up at our information desk and check in with Tara, and you can grab a membership if you'd like to. It's a way that the museum can keep doing the programs that we like to do. It's also a way for you guys to connect with the museum to let us know what we should be doing. So we look forward to hearing your responses there. My name is Tom. If you guys have questions individually, come on up. We'll answer those. If not, please enjoy the rest of your day here. And now you guys can applaud. Yeah, she had it right. She had it. Thank you.
Put up the radio play since we have half an hour until we do the...
Advise. Suggest we climb to 10. Level off and anchor. Let the storm roll under us, Captain.
Snow now here. Echo return. Confirmed. Mr. Singleton, we have it.
These are the best soundings in 25 days, Captain. Signal strength excellent, beyond the scope.
Electrical? Strike's increasing, Captain. Critical level in 12 minutes.
Okay, stand by.
Request descent before the storm makes our position, Captain.
Agreed. Helm, take her down. Descent 1/3, 15 down angle on the planes.
Aye, 15 degrees down angle.
We might just make it. Let's see if we can't anchor before it hits, eh, Mr. Singleton?
Thank you, Captain. Edwards and I will proceed to station and prepare for search evac.
Gust at 45 miles per hour. Confirmed 7 strikes at 3 miles out.
Acknowledged. Compressed ballast in tanks 4 and 6.
Aye, Captain.
This is the closest we've ever been to readings like this. I can feel it, Tommy.
The Graphicon depression signature was gigantic. Galen, this is it, man. We found it.
Wait, that wasn't lightning.
All hands to battle stations. All hands, battle stations.
Not again. Tommy, prep for evac. I've got to get topside to the bubble. If I know Latham, he'll put up a fight.
Galen,
That's why
wait.
I hired him.
That first shot was not a greeting, Captain.
This is a scientific research vessel. I am Captain Johansson. To whom am I addressing?
Come now, Captain. There's no need for formalities out here. I'm the commander of the Adamant. You will heave to or I will destroy your ship.
Helm, open hangar doors. Prep by-wing release.
Captain, we've lost rudder control. Sir, she won't budge.
This is Singleton, Captain. Observation bubble.
Report.
They hit us from directly above. Stealth ship, rapid descent.
Report to hangar deck, Mr. Singleton. You can slip away in the Mosquito. I'll deal with these cutthroats.
No, Captain, I can help.
Galen, you paid for my silence back home. Out here, my ship comes first.
Sir, I won't leave.
I can best this thief and get the crew off. Get to the hangar deck. That's an order.
Perhaps I hadn't made my point clear enough, Captain. I'm not waiting.
Helm, prepare for explosive decompression in tanks 5 through 12. 30-degree up angle on the planes. Fire deck. Open starboard doors and bring tubes to bear. Range 200.
Captain, stern crew.
Little busy here, Lieutenant.
Fire in the tail section, sir. We sealed off the cells, but they're leaking gas like a stuck baleen fish. She's finished, Captain.
Not if I can help it, Lieutenant. Waist gunner, set starboard guns to full pressure. All hands hold on to your lunge. Mr. Davers, put us on the ceiling.
Aboard the Adamant, the first officer shouted.
They're coming up at us, Commander. What? 60 feet per. They'll ram us in 7 seconds, sir.
Starboard roll critical. Execute now, now, now.
Back aboard the Indomitable.
Gunners, fire!
The airship Adamant rolled to starboard, just far enough away from Indomitable. 6 backbreaker missiles burst from their tubes and overshot Indomitable. Aboard the Adamant, the commander ordered countermeasures.
Port waist gunners, target engines and fire.
Singleton returned to his cabin with Edwards.
I've written all you need. Coordinates, everything. You'll have our position in case one of us doesn't get through.
Galen, we've come too far. If we need to, I can negotiate with their commander. We can switch allegiance.
Look, those guys aren't your run-of-the-mill airmen. They want the ARC-TOS device and they're coming to get it. Otherwise, we'd be dead already.
Then I'm gonna drop the device out the tail deck with a beacon attached.
I didn't bring it! I didn't bring it. I wasn't about to risk losing it without knowing the city's here.
But we agreed you'd have it here.
Tommy, the engines are on fire. There's a slight chance we can escape from the hangar deck, if that. Besides, I recognize that commander's voice.
Ripper teams to forward gondola. Gentlemen, we're about to be boarded. I'll keep her aloft as long as possible. You are the finest crew any captain could be honored to fly with.
They just never believe me. Crewmen, extend umbilical.
Singleton and Edwards split up just in case. They'd have to take their chances in the Mosquito. Singleton wanted to stay, help get the crew off. It was the least he could do to warn them on the way. It slowed him down, but gave Edwards a chance to make it to the hangar deck. Bounding down the catwalk, he stepped through a hatchway to the crew quarters and...
Hold your fire! That's Mr. Singleton. Sorry, sir.
How many are you, crewmen?
All of us, Mr. Singleton. The entire crew. What's left, anyway?
We're not gonna win this one, gents. Get to the drop cables, and just before they hard deck, blow ballast for lift. She's not on fire, we can all make it.
Not leaving without a fight, sir. We can take them.
You'll have to scatter rearward, then that way.
The boys are fighting the fire in the stern, sir. Not much point.
Then get a grappler crew up to the starboard missile deck. You can use Adamant's buoyancy for soft descent. Do not let them release that umbilical.
Meanwhile, aboard the airship Adamant...
Bi-wing pilot, meet me on the hangar deck. Prep for eject. Bridge crew, release umbilical.
But sir!
She's on fire, fool. And when that piece of junk goes down, she's taking us with it. What we want, gentlemen, will be on their escape wing.
It's madness to attempt to fly in this soup, sir.
Then you're welcome to a fine aerial discharge on our return. Otherwise, set for wing release on my command.
Sir, our men on the Indomitable.
I'd gotten to the hangar deck, but no sign of Edwards. I heard shots from amidships. I should have been there. I'd hoped their pneumatics would run out, but it didn't matter. We were finished. In the cockpit, I primed the booster and heard the hatch open. I told Edwards to grab a flight suit, but it wasn't Edwards.
Freeze!
I ducked down in the cockpit, pulled the release bar. The Mosquito fell away. I hoped the men could make it. At this range, the grappler crew couldn't miss. They bury him deep.
Fire, boys! Fire!
They were the bravest men I've ever flown with. I drop-kicked the Mosquito into a 5,000-foot suicide dive with the engines on fire. Shots must have hit the feeder tubes. I ran, a cowardly run from the carnage. They let me go, too. All those crewmen, all my friends, they risked their lives to save mine. There was no way to know how far I'd get. The signal flare wouldn't have attracted much attention anyway, and the wireless had a clean hole through it. For all I knew, someone would find my wreckage someday, my hand forever gripping the stick, what I deserved out there, above the timberline.
6 months later, 1,500 years of snow leaves terrain filled with snowstacks and crevices that appear out of nowhere.
June 3518. I've been steaming for 3 days, just me and the 2 Falcons. They say the waste is easy to get in, risky to get out. It wasn't long before I was getting the wing of this snow tracker, and getting a bit cocky about it. For the love of small fevers, I near lost control avoiding an ice pillar, and startled a herd of rhino just behind it. I oversteered again, rocked the whole rig up onto the opposite track. That really spooked them, and they closed at full gallop on either fender. I punched the servo tank, but the rhinos gained on my right rear quarter panel. I stood on the pedal and gained enough steam to clear one beast's head, but not the other one.
The crazy thing dipped its horn, drove it up into the rear track panel, bashed it in. Wesley twisted the tracker through a field of ice chunks before catching air over a small dune. It landed hard, tipped sideways again, and a crate burst out of the side panel, tossing supplies across the ice.
Galen Singleton was lost this time. Seriously lost. Not as if he hadn't gone missing on other expeditions, though somehow he always made it back. But this time it doesn't look good. Not even for him. You know, this whole thing, the whole rescue effort, would be easier if I hadn't learned to hate him so much. I'm Wesley Singleton, and I'm his son.
Days later, Wesley has encountered people of the Waste, the Tuckland, who remain suspicious of anyone from the outposts. He's taken captive, his machine commandeered. When he realizes nothing good can come of this, he makes his escape. But Wesley Singleton is about to meet new traveling companions.
I awoke, my cheek swollen and my back in pain. If I didn't find a way out of here, I was destined for a crevice drop. One happy thought, they'd missed my boot blade. I cut a slit in the back of the tent and headed for the outrigger.
As Wes came around the side of his machine, a tribesman rummaged through a compartment, pulling things out.
I felt violated. I tackled him into the snow, laced a punch to his temple.
The tribesman dodged the stroke and took the feet out from under Wes. Seconds away from bashing his brains in, Athena dived, her huge talons extended. Athena hit the back of his head. When he staggered back, Wes sprung forward, had him by the throat.
In the struggle, his hood came loose, and I hesitated. Soft features, skin like shanna cloth, reflected moonlight, eyes dark and gracious.
She whipped snow into his stunned face. Wes shook it off, got his hand clamped over her mouth. In a moment, she went slack, motioned with her head she wouldn't speak.
If you cry out, I'll...
She struck the back of his hand with her thumb knuckle.
Ah!
He let go involuntarily from the pain. She caught it and jammed his thumb against the socket, held it firm.
I stifled a cry into my sleeve. She had total control, astonishing strength. She leaned forward and whispered.
And if you cry out, I'll leave you here.
I shook my head. She spoke again.
Your machine would wake the dead, and you have no idea how to drive a cutter.
I'm a pilot, a fast learner.
Not fast enough. They have, what you call them? Guns. On your feet, pilot.
I always travel alone.
She nodded to a cutter.
Not anymore.
I slid my snow knife in my harness, stuffed my pack with rough cake rounds, grabbed my compass. Irritated, I'd lost my rifle. The Winslow.
She slipped from cutter to cutter and sliced the guidelines from the sails. That would give them time. She chose one to use, unfurled the sail. It whipped open, full of wind, and the cutter bucked against the anchor. It was the leader's cutter, Solon Kai. Wesley rolled into the cutter. She yanked the ground spike. Tribesmen poured from the tents.
Where do you think you're taking us?
Away?
I gathered that. Where's away?
Far away.
Shots passed through the sails as she brought the cutter to glide speed. His messenger falcon, Athena, beat hard to keep up.
You always avoid straight questions?
She glared at him, nearly knocked him out of the cutter when she shifted the boom.
I avoid the rounds. Maybe you duck better, pilot. I cannot sail between them.
They sailed flat out for 2 hours before she motioned him to the tiller. At that point, there were no longer any ice stacks to avoid, only a barren plain ahead of them.
She'd made it easy for me. The sound of the blades was the only thing that filled the silence. Made it more obvious we weren't talking. It was maybe an hour later that I could feel the tiller wobble. It kept getting worse. My eye traced the sail lines hit from the rounds, and the line snapped in my hand. The front blade buckled under and flipped us out of the cutter. My earlier bruises were feeling lonely anyway. But then, I suppose there are far worse fates than walking too far away.
Meanwhile, back at the Tucklin camp, Solon Kai prepared for a more important meeting. One that would provide his people with a greater element of risk, yet a far better payoff. But before the Snow Dog leader ascended the ramp, a runner intercepted him.
Kai-chan, Linnea's missing. She was with the pilot.
You see, Solon Kai? The pilot gets away. Why won't you pursue?
Relax, Mock. When the westerlies die down, we'll pick them up.
We waste time. The old man might find them first.
I have my reasons, and your challenge does not go without reprise.
Brayburn Wilkes, commander of the Black Hawk N-78 stealth ship, steps into the hatchway.
Solon Kai, leader of the 12 tribes. We've lost signal from Singleton's beacon.
There's been a complication, Brayburn Wilkes.
You planted the beacon as agreed, yes?
As agreed, only he left his machine behind and took a cutter without one.
How do you suppose I follow him without a beacon?
I agreed to track him, not use your machines.
Then how do you plan to rectify this, Solon Kai?
Leave that to me. I want him for other purposes. Our agreement is sustained.
I need the device, and I need to know where he's headed with it. I remind you I'm paying you handsomely. Or perhaps we should reevaluate our agreement.
Why did you do that?
Well, me? You hand me broken lines and blame it on me.
Ugh, you know nothing of cutters.
They walked all night, crossed a timberline of breakstone pine, 1,500 years old, the wood as dense as ice.
I'd found the Winslow in Solon Kai's rig, slung across my back. It pulled and tugged over my bruised kidneys, so my pace slowed to a meditative stride, watching my feet clump through the snow for hours. My nose hairs froze from each in-breath, and my legs burned like pressure stokers. I had to rest. I can just see the headlines now.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Explorer's son lost in waste on desperate rescue mission.
Oh, brilliant. Morning broke with more silence from my snow dog friend. At one point we stopped and stretched. I grabbed my canteen. You want some water?
His new friend stared at him with dark brown eyes, then snatched the canteen and took a long pull, handed it back.
One gets so very thirsty in the ice desert. So very thirsty.
The snow dog reached inside her coat, took a long draught from her own container, then smiled.
Hey. Whatever.
He might be a little new, this guy, but he's got awfully cute eyes.
I took a long draught from my canteen, too. When I brought my head down again, I spotted them.
They were 100 yards out and closing fast. His friend looked perturbed.
Typical. You brought them with you.
Oh, so now you're gonna talk, and then you blame this on me.
How else do you think they know we are here? They smell for a living.
Wesley pulled the Winslow from its sheath, ram-charged the front chamber with the crank. That would give him 30 extra yards.
You have a weapon?
Do I look like I have a weapon? Like that? I just have a snow knife.
Then circle up.
Wesley racked around and lowered the pipper on the lead beast, hoping to destroy their cohesiveness with one shot. But he missed and hit the animal to its right.
1 down, 10 to go. There's no way I'm dying in a snow hole shredded by leopards.
He'd overcompensated and drove the next shot into the snow in front of the lead cat. It didn't even blink.
I waited. My trigger finger trembled. I was transfixed on the lead cat's bright yellow and black eyes peering through me. At 20 yards, I fired. Missed. Too close now. This is gonna get wet.
Wesley detached the pistol from the Winslow, let the rifle fall, and slid the snow knife out of the sheath. It was all over but the bleeding.
They're gonna surround us! I hope you're good with that snow knife.
Linnea had a big ol' smile on her face.
You pluck my feathers, you know that? Come on! What do you got, you bastards?
Wesley drop-twisted, aimed the pistol upward, and pressed the trigger. The leopard's claws shredded his collar, sliced his neck as the round tore through the cat's lung, came out through its spine. It fell away. Another ghost cat leapt, only this time it was met in the air by a white wall of fur that smashed the cat, crushed its head. The cat snapped and slashed. Frantic, the leopards stopped their attack, backed away, then suddenly ran off. They looked over their shoulders now and again as they disappeared into the white.
They're gone! I can't believe this. We did it, girl!
Linnea wasn't moving. But for the overheated Winslow hissing in the snow beneath him, it was crazy quiet. Wesley's heart thumped as a musky smell thick as incense pooled in the air.
Now I regret skipping polar bear survival class at the academy.
They rocked from leg to leg. He wondered if they'd argue over which one would dine on him first. Panic welled inside Wesley. Adrenaline flushed his veins and pumped his lungs. He couldn't stand it anymore. Wes bolted. He stumbled face first, lost a glove. When he rolled away to breathe, the big one pinned his snow knife. He choked, tugged at his arm to get away.
Spit! The snow burns.
The bear released its grip slightly, as if toying with him. That's when Wes lost it.
What are you waiting for?
It rushed him. Wes's ears rang. When it sniffed his hand, he flinched. They stared at each other for a thick, dense minute. The bear looked to the girl, sniffed at her motionless body. She moaned. Then the old bear looked back at Wes.
Oh man, make it quick.
Oddly, the bear lumbered away. Their heads down, the rest of the bears prodded him toward the girl. When next to her, they backed off. If Wes stepped away, again they would approach.
They want me to help her.
The old bear started up the slope while the others waited for Wes to move. He sheathed the snow knife, grabbed his glove, and then hoisted his new friend over his shoulder. When he settled her, the bears fell in line behind him.
They don't intend to just let me go. Now what?
30th July. The band of bears trekked over a number of ridges before Wesley needed a break. He carried the snow dog to one of the bears, laid her across its broad back. They even waited for him to rest, like they knew he was hurt, but impatient to move on. To still his fear, he took note of subtle differences in each bear. A limp, a scar, a mangled ear, coloration, gait. The larger scarred bear looked up at him as if saying, "Come on, keep up."
You don't have to look so grim all the time, you know? You either, lump.
Paw always pawed the air when he wanted attention from Grim. Patch had a spot on his snout. And Jack reminded him of a favorite cat he once had. Miles away, and without the beacon, Braeburn Wilkes was forced to track Old Style, looking for any sign, though Solon Kai had enough.
This side scamming from the periscope depth is not working, Wilkes. We're losing time. I must get to the ice.
Meanwhile, deep into the mountains, Wes and his pack were losing light. Another storm blew in violent twists, and he fell backwards into Grim. The old bear had his nose to the wind, irritated about something, had that look of survival in his eye.
That's it! We're done!
Grim snapped at him.
We gotta get off this ridge now, or we're dead. You understand? Stupid polar bear!
Grim punched Wesley's stomach with his snout, slammed him further into the snow, and got in his face. This time, it hurt. The other bears appeared out of the blinding flakes and surrounded them.
What do you want from me?
The bears immediately scooped huge pawfuls, dug for the harder packed snow. They tore open a snow cave faster than Wes could comprehend. When they'd completed the cave, the bears settled down, snuggled against one another, but left Wesley to his own corner. That's when his snow dog friend spoke feebly.
My name is Linnea.
Wesley.
She barely heard his answer. She curled up with Lump and Paw.
The old man will help you.
What old man?
Pay attention to your elders, pilot.
Linnea made a gesture with her hand, like a sign or an emblem, then rolled away and fell back to sleep.
Probably a slight concussion. I'll have to wake her every 2 hours or so. She needs rest and medical attention.
"31st July. They set out again at first light.
Late in the day, Athena, patrolling from high up, signaled back to me. She spotted something.
Wesley's story has only just begun.
do this, Pat? I don't know where this.
How's my voice?
Can you hear me?
I'm droning. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Am I
Is that
mumbling?
good?
Is it?
Great.
You can hear me?
Okay.
Why don't we turn them off?
No, let's just.
Oh, are we live?
Compliment each other.
What?
So the world can see this.
All right. And then we're going to
But
start.
we can hear.
Yes. So we're going to start with the polar bear. And we have the reference up so that everyone can see it.
Oh, I see. That's me.
Right, and that's Patrick. But right now, this is what everyone.
Everyone's looking at the polar bear in our.
Because we are live.
So if I do soft shoe this.
How you doing, folks?
Hey.
Hello.
Good.
You're welcome to draw with us if you want.
See, he's got the idea. He's got the toned paper and the black.
Oh, man.
All we got is these charcoal sticks.
I know. We almost.
How's it going?
Are you gonna intro? Okay.
No. Good. Welcome.
Thanks. Well, that's amazing. Did you make that?
No, it's from this painting upstairs. I've studied your painting for like 10 years, so to see it in person. I'm Brian.
Brian, nice to meet you, man.
How's it going?
That looks great.
He's the one we got.
We studied it, or did Wyatt replicas and illustrations. So in between that, I think for the video you're speaking about, I think NASA Black distributed it years ago or something like that. So when I got it, and then that's.
How you doing? Please help yourself.
Yeah. Oh my God, yeah.
So you still painting away?
Yeah, like you said earlier, it's like an adventure. I went from illustration to chasing galleries. So the past 5-6 years, I've been getting into galleries. Kind of getting
I'm so sorry, John.
political, but
Sorry.
Well, you could come back around.
yeah,
My entire body is gone.
pretty much. Yeah, I'd like to.
Turn the light.
Okay, I think everyone, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you today? Excellent, welcome. My name is Patrick O'Donnell. I'm the Education and Outreach Manager here at the museum, and we have a really special treat. Today we've got the illustrator, Greg Manchis, illustrator, author of Above the Timberline. And today we're going to do a little draw and tell of polar bears, where we're going to tackle this handsome fellow behind us, draw him, and Greg is going to explain a little bit about what he's looking at, thinking about, and trying to recreate in his images. It's easy to be overwhelmed when you look at a collection such as Above the Timberline. It's very complex, it has intense imagery, it's wonderful to look at, and you might think, where do I start? Well, you start here with us. Right?
That's best.
Now, you're the master, right? And I'm your absolute favorite student. Those are your words.
That's
right?
right.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Okay. So,
right out of my mouth.
Yeah. All right. So what do you say we...
Oh, we're going to start now.
Let's get right to it. What do you say?
Well...
Is everyone ready, or does anyone have any questions before we get going?
Well, Patrick and I were going to bring in a real polar bear, but we thought it would get kind of ugly.
The OSHA compliance was just a nightmare, and we didn't do it.
I had a real polar bear when I was doing the book, but not really, no. Okay. All right, how are we starting?
Well, I'd say we go for big shapes to small shapes.
Ooh,
like
good answer.
I like that.
I've taught him well.
We practiced this before before the show started. Greg and I actually sat down in a studio, which is incredible because just like the exhibit, it's filled with all this wonderful art, lovingly thumbtacked to the walls without a care. So, you know, and yeah, it's pretty incredible. So
yeah, and he drew better than I did in the demo, which made me a little irritated. But in the beginning, let's just think, don't think polar bear, right? This is not a polar bear. Even though it looks pretty close to one, it's just shapes. Big round shape right here, and then big bunch of black, like round. These guys are round, but then we'll get into a little more of the detail and stuff of the shapes from there. But just think of these round points right there, a big round circle, and you're halfway home to polar bear at that point. You are laughing, but it's true. Okay.
All right, what do you think? Should we get, we'll draw the big shapes first?
Big shapes.
Greg and I just have some simple little sticks of charcoal, okay? That's hopefully everyone will be able to see our construction lines. And
mine has all the talent in it, though.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. No, but I switched them when you weren't looking, so, yeah.
Dang. God.
All right, here we
go.
So we're going to go for what? Big main shebang, right?
Big shapes.
Okay.
And just as I said, look at the big shapes as a circle, I'm going to square mine off.
Yeah,
Sorry.
all right, I will as well. And a little tip, too, is when you start doing your initial drawing, draw lightly. That way when you go back in with the lines you choose, you don't have to compete with your construction lines. So if anyone can't see what I'm drawing, good.
See, I'm already halfway there, or getting close anyway. And probably need a little bit more room for the ear here, so I'm adjusting it. Yeah, see, he's not wide enough, so I'm just going to take it a little bit farther over. These light lines don't matter, because we won't see them later. It's also a little bit of character when you accent some of the shapes, so they don't have to be exactly perfect. And see, my ear's up way too high. Look at it, I can't even erase it. It's called failing right there. See, look how big that ear is. Wow. See, look at that.
Sure. Where do you need me to go? More towards you.
No, I'm saying look at how far it is. Can you all slow down?
What happened?
Wow.
How's yours coming?
Yeah.
Is it good? Oh, okay. All right.
Just getting started. When did you sign it,
Oh,
too?
man, I've been planning that all week, if you knew. If you only knew. All right.
Unbelievable.
Can everyone see okay? Everyone see the construction lines?
Yeah, watch this guy, because you got to keep track of him. Doing the nose, I'm going to figure out where that eye is, right about there. His ear's going to have to go off the edge. All right. So the other thing about this, capturing the shape, this part of the polar bear is kind of a box. See that? Squarish shape, and then this, start to see the square shape on that, all within a round shape.
Mm-hmm.
I got that from John Nagy, How to Draw, way back in the day. And he did a puppy. And he did the puppy's nose kind of squared off like that. And so it's reminding me, I'm having a visual memory thing here going on. Oh, the puppy.
Yeah,
It's like a polar
it's
bear.
got a nice big bulky kind of maw going on, huh?
Yeah. The nose is kind of a square with bumps on it.
Yep. And we cropped out the Coca-Cola can, so you can...
Well, that was going to be hard to do, the label.
Yeah.
Are you laughing at my polar bear?
You can't laugh at polar bears. How's everybody doing?
They sound like they're having a good time.
Yeah, really.
Now, Greg, at what point are you comfortable starting to explore the tonality, start to block in the shapes here?
Well, once I get the basics in, like these eyeballs and stuff, then I can start to go on more of the subtle tones, I guess, you know?
Mm-hmm.
This one I can see the eyeball in there, but if you just went with shape, you'd probably just color in the whole dark shape of the eye, but I'm putting in a little bit of the reflection and stuff in the eye. Pretty subtle value. But I'm staying really pretty black at first. You see my eyes are off here a little bit. You know, if we had crayon, it'd probably be easier.
I already finished mine, so I don't know.
Polar bear noses are kind of complex.
Yeah.
But if you just make them dark and cool, then they look pretty good. See, now, you'll notice on your pencil too that if you keep changing the edge a little bit, it'll go flat or sharp if you're using the edge and the side and you keep turning it. That way the point doesn't dull. Does that make sense? So if it's dulling, you can just move it to its side and use that for actually nice little very thin strokes, and then it'll go back to pointing again. So that's one way to keep your pencil sharp as you go through this. I'm almost done. How about you? Now I'm doing some of the subtle stuff. How about you? Where are you?
Getting into that nose shape. There's like a couple complex in that bigger form. Trying to carve in with the side, sort of chisel out some forms here.
Anybody know about polar bear hair? It's, yeah, it comes off that way. It's actually hollow. It's little tubes, and each hair acts as a little hothouse to collect the sunlight and stay warm. And then the polar bear skin is jet black, so it absorbs sunlight. So if you see a skinless polar bear, he'd be all black. There's some shots of stuff like that. It's kind of weird to look at, but.
Well, tell them about how they hide their noses.
Oh yeah. Well, when they're sneaking up on their prey, they know enough that their noses show up against all that white background that they put their paw in front of their nose to disguise it. This behavior's been seen over and over again. Sometimes I wonder if it's not for some other certain condition they're trying to work out. But as far as we know, they understand that seals and other prey can pick up on that, and they cover it up to hide. One thing to remember too is you can always go darker, but you can't always go lighter. So it's always good to just stay light in the beginning until you're ready to put in some of the dark stuff.
So Greg, what is the thing that made you the most interested in the polar bear and to feature them so much in above the timberline? I mean, they're not the conventional pack animal, right?
Exactly, right. I thought, what is probably the craziest pack animal that you could have? Something that would be dangerous and scary, and polar bears came to mind pretty quickly. Also because I love to paint the shapes. Their shapes are just so fascinating. They're nice and big and sculptural, and it works for big fat brushwork. So I was playing to my strengths there.
Nice.
Makes sense? So I could put in a big old piece of white brushwork, and it would help define the polar bear shape. And also, I'd been doing polar bears since I got reaction to that back in art school, which was the reaction was, why are you doing that? And I thought if it bothered them, I'll just keep doing it.
This is your first artistic act of rebellion?
Yeah. Ha, I'm doing a polar bear. There, take that. Well, also, no one else was doing polar bears, so I thought, maybe I was in on something. All right, let's see here.
I'm feeling the nose on this. Do a little work here.
Oop. How's everybody doing so far? Giggles, all right. That's a good sign. Let's see here. There's some professionals in the room too, you know. And they could probably come up and share their work as well. Don't forget to use the side of the pencil as well. Someone forgot. The pencil was the first tool I ever used to understand drawing. How about you?
Yep.
You start with the pencil?
Yeah.
Seems like everybody starts with a pencil.
Yeah. And what was the pencil we were drawing with at your studio?
Blackwing.
Blackwing. And why do you prefer that one?
The Blackwings are nice and soft, and they respond to every mark in a way that is exactly what you tell it to do. It's all about the pressure of the mark, and if you have a pencil that responds really well, like one that's soft, then it will pick up your intention in a sense, and you drive it that way. That sounds a little lofty, but
no, that's good. I like it. I like it. No, I was just thinking about when we finished drawing the first time, and you said, "Okay, can I try something?" I said, "Okay."
Oh yeah.
You took that makeup brush and just went right across my drawing.
Yeah, I smeared it. That's right.
Yeah.
I don't have a big enough makeup brush for this one.
Well, it worked. How's everyone else coming out? Huh?
Yeah, we doing all right?
I'm hearing the toil of a million pencils on paper. It's good. It's good.
The eraser end is just thick.
This
You can make different marks too. Side of the pencil, the point of the pencil, a dull pencil, a sharp pencil. Makes sense? You guys are like already there, right? I mean, look how fast. It doesn't take much to do a polar bear, right?
That's right.
Look at this. He's already done. Did you pull another one out?
Yeah. I got like 10 in here. It's crazy.
So the other thing you can do is give a polar bear character beyond what you're looking at a little bit. So his eyes are a little doleful there, but if I accent and angle over the top of the brow, then he gets a little more focused. And if I angle the back of it up a little bit, then he gets a little sadder on that side. So you can change that a little bit. Something to think about when you first start the polar bear, not after you've already drawn it in there. So how'd you do, Rich?
That was awesome.
Yeah.
These pads are just the right knot height for me.
I know, you're too tall.
But,
you can also change the light a little bit on the polar bear by accenting certain shapes and darkening them in. I think I have a fold in the paper. Look at that. It's picking up these folds. You ruined it. So don't think of the polar bear as white either. Take a look at its value, meaning its darks and lights. And when you do that, then it's all about the lightness of the shape and the darkness of the shape. Does that make sense?
Sure.
See? Yeah, sure it does. Yeah. That's all right. It took decades to figure that one out.
I'm still figuring it out.
Are you done yet? I'm still drawing on this thing.
I gotta step back here. You can really see.
There we go. You can also make them a little bit friendlier if you just bend the corner of the mouth upward a little bit. It's pretty easy to make them smile. It's easy to make them sad. It's easy to make them mad, depending on the angles in the eye and the corners of the mouth. Not much you can do about a nose. It's just big and black. There we go.
Mine has a Salvador Dali mustache.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong.
Well, it's a new character for my next book. The artistic polar bear. That'll be great.
That's right.
It's all about a polar bear who paints.
So you can make them happy, you can make them sad, you can make them surreal. You know?
It's the adventure of drawing the polar bear. All right, I'm out. What about you?
Yeah.
How'd we do?
I'm fiddling now.
Are you erasing?
No, no.
Oh, does this erase? Really?
Yeah. You can carve right in.
Look at that. Wow, I can lighten this right here. So that'll knock that back a little bit. See, the other thing too, if you're drawing at home, you have a nice soft pencil, you can smear it and then erase out some of the highlights. So this was a little dark up in here, so I just knocked it back a little bit, and now it rounds it out a little more. This is a little dark up here, and I'll probably mess it up for a bit, and then it'll lighten up right there. Squinting is important. So you squint at the reference, but look at your drawing. So when you squint at the drawing and look at the reference, you're getting the opposite thing. You're getting too much information, and then the drawing doesn't measure up to that. So you want to squint at your drawing and look at the reference. That makes sense? Yeah. You're like, wow.
Yeah. Huh. I'm going to try that. So how do we do that? You just want to get to the rhino, don't you?
Yeah, I'm racing. When I made up the rhino in above the timberline, I was coming from the idea that what is the dumbest, most ridiculous creature that would be up in some kind of wild, cold environment. And I thought, it'd be perfect to do a rhino. That would never be up there. Oh, and it's cold, so I'll put hair on it. Perfect. And then I reinvented the woolly rhino. I should have had a giraffe or something in there.
Yeah.
That would have been dangerous.
Yeah.
Giraffes moving.
Scaly giraffe.
Hey, that looks like the reference. What are you trying to do? Well, you lifted some out of there, cheater.
Yeah. Well, I give you an eraser. I share it.
All right. Okay. I got it. Oh, can I do that? Oh, yeah. Oh, now you can go right through it. Look at that. Now it looks like hair. Look at that.
Just like Greg said, if you look where I had the highlights, I can create a chiseled edge. That is, make the form look rigid right there, but then taper off the other side and soften that, right? So that way it looks like the form is rounding over. Because not everything, it's polar bear, right? So it's not made of plate metal. It's not welded together edges. It has strong edges, though, from its bone structure, but then some of the form becomes soft and rounded. And you can have your eraser help you do that.
It's a lot about edges. Hard edges and soft edges. Lost edges and found edges. So those edges will define whether a form recedes or comes forward. The sharper it is, the more forward it comes. The softer it is, the more it drops back. So when we're looking at, if you've drawn before and you're looking at reference and you see background and you draw it real soft, you're feeling the right idea because it's dropping back away from the front. If you need something to sharpen up in focus, you actually want sharper, more rigid lines in that foreground area. And it brings it right up front again. Wow. Do we get to walk around and look at these? That looks great, Brian.
Absolutely.
Wow, I see a lot of polar bears. Jeez. All right, let's see. Oh, yeah.
Mine looks like you just ate something sour.
You could, yeah. It just ate something sour. Oh. All right, how are we doing? That's not coming off of there any sooner.
So to what Greg was talking about a little bit earlier about lost found edges, I also do something right here. If you notice the corners of the ear, I just make the line a little bit darker. That's a sort of mimic condition that's called an occlusion shadow. And an occlusion shadow is where two forms meet. The very closest portion is the darkest. You can check it when you squish your hands together and there's a line, there's a tiny little bit of dark there, an occlusion shadow. And you can mimic that, and that's what I did. But your eye is trained for pattern recognition. So just these little indicators help you, the viewer, fill out the rest of the object. So even if there was nothing from here down, you would still see the side of the bear.
Occlusion shadows.
Occlusion shadows.
Something I did not learn in art school.
Yeah, no, me either. How much it cost? No.
Yeah, that I learned on the first day.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
No, it's, you know, to be fair, you know, every day you're learning, you study, and, you know, just coming to places like the Rockwell Museum where you see all these different techniques and different things, and there's tiny little nuggets of information all over the place for you to, you know, pick up and incorporate into your toolbox and start to use, you know, and bring into your own work.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You want to do the rhino? What do you think? You want to do the rhino?
Are you guys ready for a rhino?
Who's ready for a rhino?
It's going to be a little complex, a little more complex. It's going to be a polar bear with a horn on it.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, yes, right.
Want to do it?
Yeah, that's
cool. All right.
All right.
Everybody, all yours looked exactly like ours, right? Okay. Oh, you got to put the rhino up, don't you? Okay. Oops.
Ta-da.
Wow,
Nice.
look at that. And there it is.
This is not the woolly variety. That was.
Yeah. If you want to make it woolly, you can just put hair after this part.
That's right. That's right.
So that one again is kind of like round boxes, right? Big sort of rectangle right through here. A little sloping rectangle.
Yeah.
These guys you know how to do, that's no problem. Big circle for the eyeball.
You can even get away with a triangle too, right? So has everyone seen this, basic shapes? So Greg and I are creating a plan of attack here. And if you look, Greg is saying there's a square here, and he's right, but you could also theoretically get away with a triangle.
Exactly.
You see?
Yeah.
And you can break it down. The eyes are circles. The nose is an upside-down triangle. Obviously, the horns are triangles. And the ear is sort of a kind of a kidney bean shape, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. With
So,
fur on it.
Sounds.
All right, let's try this.
All right. What do you think? Trying to figure out how much of it to include here. So I can get the horn.
I know, yeah. I guess I'll have to shrink this down a little bit.
All right, so everyone can draw a shape like that, right? All right.
So this is a drawing class. All right, pause. Let me catch up.
So, okay. All right.
Okay, continue.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we've got this established, right? Now let's find another landmark. Like Greg said, the eye is a circle, right? Well, if we look at the way we've plotted this, it's kind of somewhere right about there, right? Can all agree on that chunk of real estate?
Make sense? I didn't put my eye in yet. And you place those things by looking at landmarks.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So the eye is rear of that horn, just behind it a little bit, and in front of the ear, obviously, but it's right about where the forehead comes down in there, and it's just about almost in the center of that box.
Yep. And so if you look at, just like you said, if you imagine an imaginary line, okay, going straight up from the eye, right here, there's our first horn, okay? Nice and light. If we just sketch lightly, we don't have to worry about competing with it at the end. Okay, and then you notice this comes up. And then if you notice the front horn is kind of at an angle, right?
Yeah.
See that? It slopes down. Mine, it looks like, is not going to stay on the page.
I'm still looking at general shapes like triangles and circles, rectangles, just to sort of place things.
If you look at that nostril, right, what is it? It's just a triangle, right? So bring a line out from the eye. It's about a little step down, right about here. Triangle and a triangle, boom. Rhino nose.
A line straight through the circle makes landmark for the eye.
Yes. Now he looks like a sleeping rhino. All right. Then what do we have? Up high, we've got the ear, which is kind of, I'm going to draw it over here. If you look, the ear is sort of this shape, right? It's kind of a kidney bean shape. So we'll throw that up here. Around.
Oh, kidney bean. Yeah.
There you go.
My kidney bean isn't quite beanie enough.
Then you got the other ear behind where you just see the top. Okay. It's interesting too is sometimes, we're all familiar with what a rhinoceros is, but until you actually sit down and study it and look at it and find all those particular things and the uniqueness of its features that make it so distinct. It's like when I tell my students, everyone's seen a fire hydrant, right? But if I have you draw one out of your head, it won't look 100% correct, right? Because memory's an imperfect thing. That's why illustrators go through the trouble of gathering so much reference so that they can make a more informed, incredible image.
There's a guy that told a story once that he mentioned to one of his creative department guys who was an illustrator. He said, "Wow, I could never draw like you draw." And the guy said, "What is there something wrong?" He said, "Well, no, I just don't have what you have." He said, "Well, you have all your fingers, right? Yeah, and you got your hands, got your arm. That's all the equipment you need to do what I'm doing when I'm drawing, say, something like a chair." And he pointed to the chair. He said, "What do you see?" Well, it's what the guy described was basically what we think of as a chair. And a chair can be in so many different shapes. Basically, it has a platform, 4 legs usually, and a back. But when this guy started to point to different aspects of the chair was when the artist was pointing out, the other guy realized, wait, I see, there's turned posts on the chair, and there's that one is smaller than the other. It's thicker in places and thinner in places, and the seat has scallops out of it, and the back has a semicircular piece at the top with shafts coming up that are also turned, and you have to identify all the shapes. So it's about the observation. So when I'm talking with my students on my online class, most of the time we're talking about observing the form. It's all about the observation of it. If you can't really detect what you're looking at, then you really can't reproduce what you're looking at. So you have to see it for the shape that it is, not the actual thing that it is. When we're working in oil paint, I try to tell them to get away from thinking of hair as hair, to see it as a large shape on someone's head. And when you think of hair as shape, you can actually get a better representation of hair than if you think hair. There's that whole drawing on the right side of the brain many, many years ago. And what she was trying to do was get people to not see the subject. So she would have them turn the reference material upside down and just draw the shapes. So if you're drawing a figure that way, you can only see the shapes, and you don't usually think of arms and fingers and hands and eyes and all the rest.
That's right.
Anyway.
And to Greg's point, when again, there's no lines that our hands can produce that yours can't, right?
Right.
It's a matter of distilling information. When you look at somebody, you know that there's hair on their head, you know something's made of wood, you know you're standing on carpet. You're already receiving visual cues that tell you what you're looking at. You already know. All you're doing is identifying what the visual markers are for those cues and then repeating them in line. And that's how you create the illusion of varying textures.
What he said.
Or did I just make that up?
Yeah, I don't know what you're talking about.
That's what the cue card said. I don't know.
So once you get those markers in, then you can start to go back and identify a little bit more of the shape. Kind of like doing that on the eye right now.
This guy's kind of a cool example too of where you can erase back into the shadows to create that leathery skin texture.
Yeah.
One of the tricks I like to do is, see how I have the shadow here, is I can actually cut lines in, okay, with an eraser. I'm going to do this vice versa, and take my charcoal and bring the line out. You see? Because the place that you see the texture most is right where the form is rolling in to shadow. Okay? So just those three, as Greg showed me, you know, our tendencies and inclinations are to include everything that we see. But that's not necessarily what makes for the most successful illustration. Sometimes what you exclude is as important is what you include. So with just a few little lines, like so, we can create that sense of that really wrinkly leather texture, right?
I hear you.
And it is still a tough lesson to remember.
Yeah, the leaving things out part is...
Yeah, it's counterintuitive.
Yeah, and very much a decision-making process. You have to decide where it goes or doesn't go. You can make easy wrinkles if you use the side of your pencil and twist and turn it as you pull the line. It'll make thick and thin lines, and they resemble wrinkles. Something every young artist loves to draw, those photographs of older people who have loads and loads of wrinkles, and they love getting in there and organizing them.
An eyeball.
So do you ever say this just isn't going where I want it to go and discard something?
Abandon it? Never.
Never?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually the way that works now, though, is I'll be doing those little thumbnail sketches and abandon those like crazy, working it out until I get one. Ooh, now I got something. Then I start to work that a little bit more with focus. And still, they can just I can keep missing something that I feel I want, and it's not on the paper yet. But I just keep working those until I get something. If it's a hard struggle to get to that, like, you know, you've done 65 thumbnails and you're just close to it, I'll project that thumbnail to blow it up so I can keep the life of the thumbnail and then draw it again. And now I've got proportions going on that I had when it was really tiny. Because you can blow things up when they're small to any size. But you can't start large and reduce it and have it hold together much. It's easier to start small and work up. So over the years, starting small, that cuts out a lot of mistakes right away. So by the time I get to a finished drawing and then a finished painting, I've already done the groundwork. I know where it's going. And the mistakes are a little bit like a performance on stage where you improvise or compensate at that point. A lot of this is just rehearsal. This is rehearsal for the final performance of painting, all right? And the students heard that when I tell them that. They're like, oh, you mean I practice it for a while and then I do the performance? Yeah. And I didn't get that in art school. I got it from drawing hundreds and hundreds of pictures. But yeah, that sort of approach is important to think about for what's going to happen in a painting, to actually practice it before it goes. Now, the older illustrators, and Wyeth and Rockwell being one of them, a couple of them, they did studies and stuff. I don't get a lot of time to do studies in illustration, but Leyendecker did a lot of studies and then would paint it because he'd put in enough research to know where he was going when he was on the canvas working again. And Rockwell's done any number of excellent studies and drawings to prepare for a specific painting.
We grew up in this world where we want to get an A the first time. I love what you're saying about the process and the study. It's like, don't worry about, I got my star and the A+. It's just all a big cycle of growth.
Yeah. The process is so much more important, sometimes more than the finish. But the finish is kind of a demonstration of the process. And there's a point at which you either stop or you ruin it, or you have to loosen it back up again, and that's all part of the process as well. I heard someone talking about Picasso doing Guernica, and that he went down these false trails trying to figure out how to draw this bull that's in the painting. He kept saying about how he was wrong and it was false. And all I could hear him saying was that Picasso was on the trail of research. He was discovering. It's not that they were wrong or the false trails. They were absolutely the trails he had to go down to bring back the information. But we don't, as a culture, we don't see that as part of the process. We just see that it was a failure, a point that he abandoned to get back to something else. But sometimes we have to make those mistakes to understand where we're going in the first place. Anyway, I hope, did that fit with what you were saying?
That was fantastic.
Okay.
And it's a great time to be a learner now. We live in a day and age where the sum of all human knowledge exists in a box on our desk, you know. So,
yeah.
You know, research is really.
You could probably do this with your pencil too, but I forgot to do some rubbing because Patrick gave me charcoal to work with today. And
wild card.
There's another level of subtlety with the rubbing like this that you can create for value. That takes it another step toward realism a little bit. And I can modify this. I'm also staying quite loose. See, I'm going outside the lines. Like, you know, our entire society doesn't want you to color outside the lines, but artists do it naturally. And when you do that, you give something like this a lot of motion. Just outside the lines. Now I can come back in with my eraser and pull out some of the highlights again to accent those edges and get a little shine onto the front of the eyeball there on the rhino. Now I'm controlling the shapes with the value. Make sense? And it's sometimes tricky to actually say stay loose. But when you're not worried about being accurate, then you give more character to the line. And then that gives more character to the drawing, and then you can take it wherever you want. So I'm not paying too much attention to being correct in certain things like staying within the lines and things like that, so I can come in and control that.
What do you think?
How's the rhino? You done?
I think it's time to call it. Getting close. Does anybody have any questions for Greg or I? Wrap up. Does everyone want to hold up their drawing? So.
Oh yeah, you guys got to hold up your
we
drawing.
Want to see them all here.
All right, nice, nice, cool. Oh no, keep them up. Hold on. Oh, these are great. These are great. Unbelievable. Look at that.
Every one of them's competition. So. You know.
Perfect. All right. Hey. Excellent.
Excellent. Wonderful.
All right. You have a career in art waiting for you.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Nice.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Here we go. I'm going to make this worth $5.
That's right. I see this.
There you go. Here we go. Pretty fancy. All right.
Practice that more than drawing.
Whoa, look at this. I had a fold under there.
There's like an S on here.
Oh, nice kidney bean.
Yeah. That's
Kidney bean. All right. Charcoal was a good move, yes? Oh, we're going to turn that off.